Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Desiree Duffy, and this is the Books That Make You show. And today we're talking about books that make you step into an epic fantasy. Now, epic fantasy, it's so alluring. It's like stepping into a whole new place. It's escapism at its ultimate best. I mean, we're talking about magic and wizards and princesses and fairies and mythical beings, legends, and so much more. And I am always in awe of fantasy writers who can create these incredible worlds for us to momentarily just live in. And our guest today is the author of such a series, Ilana C. Myer. Now, she is the author, the first book in the series, I should say, is The Last Song Before Night. And then that was followed by Fire and Dance. And now The Poet King is released. Myer has worked as a journalist in Jerusalem and a cultural critic for various publications. As Ilana Teitelbaum, she has written book reviews and critical essays for The Globe, The Mail, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Salon, and the Huffington Post. Bravo! That's quite a resume there. Ilana, hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Desiree.
Okay, let's start with that big thing, because I love fantasy. I love fantasy and sci-fi. Those are two of my favorites. So let's just explain to the audience who might not be familiar with epic fantasy. Like, what are you guys talking about? Do you want to explain what that is?
Okay, so some people have told me that my books are all actually high fantasy. So sometimes these categories get away from me. But the way I always thought of it, there's usually the word epic is key, that events happen on an epic scale. And it tends to take place in a world that is not our own, and a world in which there is magic. And after that, the parameters are very loose and you could do a lot of things. But usually it comes down to big conflicts, high stakes, epic scale, and that's what epic fantasy tends to mean.
And now you're releasing the third book in a series. I always love, there's something about that third book, right? Because the second, first you're setting up a lot of stuff. The second you're kind of segueing. And then the third, you kind of get into the action. So tell us a little bit about am I right? Or
so that can often be true. In this case, things evolved a little differently just because when I set out to write Last Song Before Night. It was many years ago. I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but I planned on writing a standalone novel because that was something I always really enjoyed, like a book that has a beginning, middle, and end. So that was my plan. And so actually Last Song Before Night, which I have right here, is a standalone novel. Like, you can read it and, stop there if you want. But it just so happened that when I made the book deal, my agent was like, so by the way, we've sold it as a series. And I was like, oh, okay. That works. And the truth is, I had already started to have ideas for more that I could do with that world. So I was like, okay, so instead of just a sequel, I can turn it into a trilogy. I'll just make it bigger. And that was when my plans got away from me again, because that's not what happened again. My second book turned out to be really very self-contained, though, there's still things that are left unresolved, but the second book really turned out to be its own entity in a totally different way. And then the third book was once again a new opportunity to explore totally new things. And so there's definitely continuity. You follow the same characters, the ones who make it through all three books. But I also set out to do something different in each book. I think of it as kind of like a series of paintings of three. You have like these paintings that are related to each other, but they're also each one their own work. I kind of think of it like that.
Sure, sure. Well, that's really good, actually. I mean, a lot of times, too, people start a series and then they feel forced or coerced almost into reading the next book for it to continue. So if it tidies up and they feel fulfilled, but then, like you said, they if they like these characters, the ones that lived, they can follow them on a new adventure. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit. Let's start with book one. Why don't you just kind of set the stage? Give us the line of each one so we know what to expect.
The premise of the series is that it takes place in a world where poets have magical and political power. This was an idea that came to me through studies in Celtic mythology, where there was this idea that they believed that their poets actually had the power to curse people. You know, the kings were afraid of them. And I thought, well, isn't that really cool? Especially because I live in a world where art seems to have no power at all. And what would it be like if there was really something more at stake when it comes to the creation of art? And so that was the premise that I began with. And then it ended up opening up from there in subsequent books into greater complexity.
Excellent. And when you're writing your books, do you have an audience in mind? What age range do you feel you're at, and who are you writing for?
Well, I would definitely say that my books are adult, but at the same time, I read books like this when I was a teenager, so it's hard to say nowadays. You know, my books are not YA, but I think that a teenager could definitely pick them up. Even though I write, you know, I'm always writing what I would want to read.
And for people who like magic, Celtic lore, so we're checking off those boxes. What else? Yeah. Do we have fairies? Do we have dragons? Do we have elves? Where are we? I know I'm getting into the high fantasy there with some of that, but can you give us an idea of some of the characters and set the stage a little bit with the setting?
So that gets back to the inspirations for the series, because in addition to being intrigued by the Celtic poets, I was also interested in the troubadours in medieval France. And I kind of combine them. And so you have characters who have elements of the magic of the, you know, that's inspired by the Celtic poets is pervasive, but the setting and the characters are more like what, you know, I would imagine of the troubadours. These they're all men. It's a sexist society, and that's one of the themes. There's one woman poet, and she's not really included as a result, and that's, you know, one of the tensions that comes in. So there, you know, these men who are used to getting their own way with women. They're used to kings setting them up nicely. You know, they're men who have it all, and then something real comes to challenge them. You know, that I had people say to me, you know, oh, your men are jerks, and I was just like, that's my experience, you know, but I actually still like them, you know, just, it doesn't hurt to give them some challenges to work with for once in their lives. That was kind of the point.
Oh yeah. They deserve that. And definitely, we put up with them a lot, don't we?
Well, and it brings an opportunity for them to discover depths in themselves, both for good and bad, that they would never have come to if they had just been going along with everything being so easy and handed to them.
Yeah. So you're touching a little bit on character development. Tell us a little bit about how do you develop your characters? What are some of your methodologies?
It's so hard to explain because then I have to remember what I did. I would say the key for me with creating characters, and this is going to sound a little annoying, and I'm sorry, but The key for me is that it seems to take a while. Like, I don't write my books quickly. And it takes time for me to discover who these people are and their dimensions and what they want. And, I'm really always driven to create characters that I haven't seen before necessarily in other fiction, or I kind of want to play with things I've seen and do it in a different way and, subvert expectations. And all of that takes time to grow. But for me, it's the most exciting part of writing. I really discovering characters and, figuring out their complex stories. That's the most exciting part for me.
Yeah. So pick a character that you've written, one that you're going to magically bring to life right now. If you could bring one of your characters to life, to live in your world and sit down next to you and have a cup of tea, who would that be and why?
Okay. I think it would be, my answer would change by the day. I'm going to say Marlin, who's this real jerk. He's a poet and he's very talented. And he's very witty and he has a dark side. And he lets his dark side carry him away. But he's also very amusing. And so if we're just talking about a cup of tea, I think that would be very entertaining.
He's not the kind of guy that you'd want to have lingering around, though. It's like, okay, a cup of tea and then be gone with you.
Well, he's going to make trouble. So yeah, that would be best.
Yeah. How about building your world? Are you the type of author who has a wall filled with thumbtacks and drawings and things? Or do you have it digitized? Do you have like a world Bible? How do you craft and keep track of all the elements and, rules of your world?
So lots of notes for sure. I did have a world Bible at one point when I was dealing with the second book, because the second book gets really complicated with the world. And I've drawn maps to figure things out. But mainly, I've turned in the past to history for my inspiration for my world. And what's wonderful about writing fantasy is that you don't have to adhere to any actual facts. You can take what you want and leave the rest. And so, I was able to take what appealed to me from elements of Europe, elements of Al-Andalus, Spain, the Muslim world, and just like put it all together into something that would serve my story. Anything that intrigued me that I had learned about. Like, I don't know if the idea for the second book would have come to me at all if I hadn't visited Spain. But just a trip to Cordova and visiting these hidden gardens behind a mansion it all ended up feeding into an inspiration that became another book. And so that's my main source of inspiration with world building is actually history and any travel that I can manage to do.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's very much George our mysteries, real mythologies. But in the end, it's its own. Westeros is its own entity.
Right.
Now, do you feel, and I'm just asking this because I've heard this a couple of times from different authors, so it just kind of struck me as funny. They have mermaids in their books, and apparently there's a whole thing about if you don't get mermaid mythology right, they'll come after you.
Yikes.
Do you feel a certain degree of, okay, I have this character and I need to kind of follow these parameters, or are you creating new and exciting ways for your character to behave?
Well, of course, whenever it's very clear that I'm drawing on a certain culture in my books, I have to be very careful that I'm doing it in a way that's respectful and that isn't wildly ridiculous in some way. And so I was very aware of that when I was dealing with, more Islamic elements in the second book. I had read so much just to try to make sure that this all worked and wasn't going to devolve into stereotypes. Other than that, though, I think if I had gotten too purist with Celtic mythology, it's possible that the Celtic mythology scholars would have come for me. But because I take so many liberties with it, it's barely recognizable, and I don't think I have to be too scared, though who knows, I guess.
You never know. You never know. So tell us a little bit. We'll jump over to your work as a journalist. Like, you've been a journalist. You've also written book reviews and you've written critical essays. Tell us a little bit about that facet of your personality. And you do write under a pseudonym, and you're very okay with that. Ilana Teitelbaum is your pseudonym. So
that's when I give a name.
Okay. So Myer is your pseudonym, I should say.
Yeah. Because, let's face it, I'm not going to try to get people to pronounce Teitelbaum. And, I can just imagine fitting all that on a book cover. It wasn't worth it. But yes, as a journalist, I wrote under Teitelbaum. I grew up part of my life in Jerusalem. I've kind of been back and forth from Jerusalem, New York, and back, and it's a long story. But when I was in my 20s in Jerusalem, I had been an administrative assistant in New York for some years, trying to write while I supported myself. And the experience was such that I decided I was never going to be an administrative assistant again, but I had to figure out what to do. And so I thought, well, what skills do I have? Well, I can write. So I ended up pounding the pavement to get stories into publications in Jerusalem. And over time, I built up, a portfolio. And when the opportunity arose to review books, I jumped at that because that's a natural skill that I have. And so that was how I got into that. But of course, I did a number of things to make ends meet in addition to journalism, because that's the reality. So I was also writing content for websites and writing things for tourists, which restaurants to eat at or whatever, because, in Jerusalem, everything revolves around tourism. So, but it was a really eye-opening experience because there are very few places in the world that are as complex or as misunderstood. And I had the opportunity to see a lot of things up close that were lessons for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. So what lessons or what tips, advice would you like to give to somebody who might want to take on writing a fantasy novel? What would you tell them?
Well, I would say give it time, because it's harder than it looks. At least I think so. It took me 7 years to write my first book. And I would say, read everything. And, if you have the opportunity to travel, do so. Just experience and read and do whatever you can because everything ends up being fodder for inspiration.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Who are you reading right now, or who would you recommend reading? Are you into anybody's series, or what books are striking your fancy right now?
So right now, I've been gravitating to things that are easy to read because the pandemic. I just finished a really fun book, The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. By Adele Waldman, which kind of gets back to what I was saying before about, these men who are, haven't really experienced anything troubling in their lives and are very used to everything going their way. That's basically what that book is about, and it's hilarious. Anyone who has ever dated a man will find it very relatable. It's from his point of view, and it's wonderful. I'm currently reading the Jane Austen Book Club by Karen Joy Fowler, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. It's, very witty. It's very clever. And I'm enjoying that. And I've started rereading Agatha Christie novels that I hadn't read since I was like 10 years old. And I think the pandemic just broke me, and now I'm reading everything Agatha Christie ever wrote, because that's where my head is right now.
Oh, fun.
It is fun.
Well, I find too that a lot of people find some kind of comfort going back to something that they know or something from their childhood. Even watching old television shows and things like that, you kind of harkens back to a simpler time. And I think sometimes we need that. Yeah.
I mean, I am seeing that she really, was an amazing storyteller. So there's a reason that she was such a big deal, but just having fun right now.
What's on the horizon? Is there a book 4? Is there a new series? What do you got cooking?
So right now I don't have anything under contract. And what I'm working on right now is kind of experimental, so I can't talk about it. As far as I know, this series will be a trilogy. So I wouldn't want to overstretch it. But people have said to me, why isn't there more? So you never know what's going to happen.
Well, and this is the kind of content too. I mean, maybe you're doing this already, maybe you're not, but start shopping it. The streaming channels, Netflix, Hulu, they're craving content. Let them take it over, and much like the Marvel universe, they'll pull in other writers and they'll have all of these spin-offs, and you can just sit back and say, oh, cool, So that might be something for you to consider too, if you haven't already.
Well, if that happens, that'll be fine with me.
Fantastic. Ilana, where can people find more information about you? Find you, your website, social media? And if you're doing any events or if you got anything coming up, where can people find out more?
My website is a good place for all that. It's ilanacmyer.com. And I'm on Twitter as Ilana CT, but I never know if I should direct people there because, unless you want to follow someone really sarcastic, it's up to you.
I do. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. And hold up the book one more time. And let's make sure that everybody can find.
This is the first book.
That's the first book.
Yes. And I should really show off these beautiful covers, shouldn't I? This is the second, Fire Dance.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. I'm not good at this yet.
The covers are fantastic. They are gorgeous.
And
absolutely. This doesn't do it justice. My little drawing. Yeah.
Ooh, and this is the Poet King. Let me see if I can get it in.
Yeah, it's a little bit backwards. There you go. Pull back. There's the branch that I drew. You can see where that came from.
Yes, that's actually it's from a little more obscure story in Celtic mythology that I just loved. So I ended up using it as an important element in this trilogy.
Oh, fantastic. Well, people need to read The Poet King to find out exactly what that's all about.
Indeed.
Fabulous. Ilana, thank you so much for being here today. I had a wonderful time talking to you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. You have to come back again sometime, okay?
Awesome.
And thank you, everybody, for being here on the Books That Make You show. You can find out more about us on our website as well. It's booksthatmakeyou.com. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, YouTube. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and also sign up for our newsletter. We always have bookish news and fun things going on, contests, giveaways, events, and more. So once again, that's booksthatmakeyou.com. Until next time, all of my book buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.